All right, friends, so we're going to get underway. Thank you all so much for being here today. My name is Andrew Schwartz. I work at the Center for Earth Ethics, and I have the honor of being the convener for these dialogues. And this is our final one. We've done 5 of these. And it is, yeah, it's really cool to be here with you all and to be able to host this incredible panel. It's such a nice way to be ending this dialogue series hosted by the Faith and Food Coalition. With that in mind, I want to extend a special thank you to all the coalition members who brought this dialogue series together. We started working on this in March. It's incredible that it's June. I don't know if the fact that it's June is shocking to anybody else, but certainly is to me. Members of the coalition are Steve Chu of the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation, Dr. Chris Elisara of the World Evangelical Alliance, Dr. Mariam Hussein of the Islamic Medical Association of North America, Joshua Basafin from the Parliament of the World's Religions, Kelly Moulton from Interfaith Public Health Network, and Gopal Patel from Boomi Global. I also want to give special thanks to my boss and the founder and director of the Center for Earth Ethics, Corinna Gore. Really appreciate all the support and guidance through this process. The Food System Summit is hosted by the United Nations to raise awareness about the impacts of our food systems are having on people and the planet, and to crowdsource solutions and catalyze action to make things more accessible, equitable, and sustainable from now into the future. With this being the last dialogue, it's hard not to be a bit reflective about what came before this, and most importantly, where it's going next. And that's part of our task here today. Throughout the series, we've explored food access and security. We've looked at the bond between human and planetary health. We've explored what it will take to regenerate and heal the earth through our food systems. And we've learned how food systems can be made more humane for the workers who put food on our table. Today is about community development, exploring how we can best empower communities so that they can build resilience to climate shocks, to stressors, and to conflict. This fact always gets me, but a staggering 60% of global food production occurs in just 5 countries. That's China, the United States, India, Brazil, and Argentina. A shock or plague or storm in any of these regions will have a rippling impact to food costs and food availability around the world. We've seen this year and continuing that COVID-19 has and continues to threaten value and supply chains and then we also have increasing storms, droughts, and floods from climate change. So there's a lot to prepare for. There's a lot that needs to happen. And thankfully, we have a group of people here today who are doing that work in their own ways in their own parts of the world. And I'm just so glad that each and every one of you is here, and it's my honor to introduce each one of you. So first, we have Sandrine Dixson-Declavay, who is the Action Track 5 lead, and we're so very happy that you're here. She is the co-president of the Club of Rome and holds several advisory positions. And in 2017, she also co-founded the Women Enablers Change Agent Network, or WECAN. Sandrine, thank you so much for being here. We have Lucy Mulenkei. She is the executive director of the Indigenous Information Network. She is part of the Maasai Indigenous community in Kenya and works for sustainable development within Kenya's pastoral communities. Lucy, welcome. Ravneet Singh is currently the South Asia project manager at EcoSikh, and he works with the Sikh community to adapt to the threats of climate change through Sikh values, beliefs, and institutions. Ravneet, a pleasure. Sha'Von Terrell is the deputy director of the Black Church Food Security Network. She specializes in food and land sovereignty and advancing legal self-reliance in food systems. Carolina Ballivian Fernandez. I think I said your name wrong, I'm sorry. Anyways, I've practiced a lot, I think I got it wrong. Co-founder and director of the Yindah Foundation. It's a nonprofit dedicated to support and create sustainability and environmental projects in Bolivia. Thank you so much for being here. And then we have Rabbi Nate DeGroot. He is the Associate Director, Spiritual and Program Director at Hazon, Detroit, the Jewish Lab for Sustainability. In this role, he is helping the Metro Detroit Jewish community reconnect with their own earth-based Jewish roots while investing in their historic relationship with the Detroit community through its transformative Black and Native-led food and environmental justice work. And finally, without further ado, we have our moderator, Bibi La Luz Gonzalez. She is an international political economist who merges food security, climate sustainability, and human rights. She's also the founder of Eat Better WECAN in Guatemala. And with that, I'm going to step back and hand things over to Bibi. Thank you all. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you to all the panelists today here, and thank you to the audience who some of you have been here from day one of these faith and food dialogues. So we're incredibly happy that you've sticked around and also put in the chat so many great perspectives and questions. And today we are here. Thank you to the Interfaith Coalition as well. We've become more than colleagues, but friendship in trying to move these transformations in food systems. And with a panelist as well, thank you so much for your time, your commitment, and that vision to eventually make this happen. As Andrew was saying, I merge different topics together, and I see very clearly how this action track 5 on resilience with vulnerability, shocks, and stresses also merges so many aspects from the different action tracks. So it's fantastic to be in this final faith and food dialogue session with this merger of everything that we've seen here over the last 5 weeks, and bring new information as well and new perspectives too. When I hear resilience, I sometimes really wonder how we can make this possible. There are just so many different aspects that we still need to work our way. There are so many livelihoods that are being affected by different aspects, as Andrew was saying, or as Action Track 5 mentions, which are climate disasters, conflict, and different ongoing issues that affect the food availability, access, and the nutrition of it. We hear climate change really affecting some countries, some more than others, and those who are being prone to these adverse conditions are the ones that aren't necessarily, making that happen, but just really having those effects on them. Last week we had one farmer from Guatemala, and she had told me before that her crops got completely destroyed by this unseen freeze that happened. And how was she protected? And so she basically lost her income of what she was going to sell and the food that she was going to eat. So I really want to understand how we can really reduce these stresses that no one should be going through. So today we have 6 panelists today here with us, and like as the previous sessions, we are going to be doing one general question for the 6 panelists. As the audience, you can write in the chat your comments, your thoughts, your questions, and we will be answering them in the chat, but also here in the panel too. So the order that we're going to go today to answer these first questions, we're going to go with Sandrine, with Lucy, Carolina, Rabbi Nate, Sha'Von, and Ravneet. Then we'll have an open phase of dialogue where we'll just ask, some of the follow-up questions, and also considering the faith part, being these faith and food conversations very unique and extremely valuable to the other dialogues that are being going around. So I thank you all. I am so glad you're putting what you're having for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. I would just show you, I have this drink that I'll be drinking throughout the session. Thank you, Ravneet. This is actually pineapple peel with cinnamon sticks. So very, very healthy too, and using all of the food that we have instead of just throwing it away. So thank you all for being here. Let's start off with Sandrine, and this is a general question for everyone too. So as we had a conversation of before, this question really stuck, and this is the first question. So I would love to know, where does resilience rely? And how does this reflect back or forward into empowering local communities?
Great, thank you, Bibi, and thank you to all of you who have been working with us so much on really thinking through the resilience work, and also all the incredible work that you do in building resilience within your own communities. What I'd like to do is share my screen, if I may. So let's see if that actually is working. Can you see my screen? Yeah? Okay. And let me see if I can make it. Is it big or is it just? There we go.
Yes, there it is.
Super. Okay. So to your question, I mean, I think that clearly, as the president of the Club of Rome, I would say this, but for me, resilience is about a holistic approach and a systems approach. And as you can see in this slide, the beauty of resilience is actually that it's looking at the full food system in its entire integrity, and the way in which we should build resilience through a variety of different types of initiatives. So resilience has to be felt at the individual, the household, the community, and within the entire food system. And we are very much, in our case, relying also on new practices, new models, and existing old models that we want to scale up. So agroecology, ensuring regenerative ecology, etc., or regenerative agriculture to build this resilience. So that's the core of this slide. But what you can see is that the more we do that, we need to ensure that it's integrative, that it's right-based, that it's context-specific, that the solutions when we look at resilience are taking in the territorial, whether it's urban or rural, that it's also nutrition sensitive, so that we look at diversification within the value chain in order to ensure and enhance resilience. And of course, that it is sustainable. Sustainability, and you brought up the fact that it's really important to look at the environmental, the economic, and the social implications of the food system. And sustainability has to be across all of that. But of course, this system needs to be inclusive. And for us, that inclusivity is what we've tried to build through the work that we're doing on the action track, the way in which we've tried to engage with stakeholders and ensure that we're talking about the role of smallholders, that we're talking about Indigenous communities, that we're talking about farmers, that we're talking about women and gender issues, that we're also looking at the role of business and how can we ensure that the role of business is clearly looking at people, planet, and prosperity and not just at profit. So this is fundamental within the type of systems holistic approach that we've been looking at. But coming back also to the role of the community, one of the big points that I'm making time and time again, and what I find is quite amazing looking at the food system itself, is that the commodification of food systems has totally dehumanized the food system. And we need to get back to a food system that services people. We need to get back to a food system that lives within the planetary boundaries, but is ensuring that there is access to healthy food for all people. And that is one of the clear calls that we have around universal access to food. It is linked very much also with the fact that, as you indicated, if you look at conflict zones and peace building, there needs to be a shift away from just allowing for conflict to totally disrupt or even pandemics, the value chains, coming back to the 60% of the food being produced by only 5 countries. And therefore, those that are not necessarily producers who are not even enabling the access to food for their people. And that means that you also need to look at new governance models, that you need to look at new integrated cross-cutting approaches and the different actors within those approaches in order to ensure that actually we are building that resilience to future shocks and that we anticipate those future shocks. So my perfect food system is a system that truly is ensuring that there is universal access to food for all, and that that universal access to food is being created in a system which is growing food for the people in respect of the planet and coming back to the core of our relationship with the earth. That is why also we are having this conversation today with the faith-based community and the conversations that we've had in the past. The importance of coming back to Mother Earth, the importance of coming back to what's more important for the faith-based community, which is this connection with nature, this connection with the earth, and not the fact that we are pillaging the earth only for the profit of a few. So maybe I'll leave it at that with this particular slide and indicate that I'm very hopeful that the work of the resilience track and the continued work that we can do together by building coalitions with the faith-based community, but also with local action groups, with the incredible work of the youth, ensuring that there is access to food, that we can continue to build on that and really make this not just about the UN Food System Summit, but about an actual movement as we build that together.
Brilliant, Sandrine. Thank you so much. I still continue to write down everything you say of what we had in the pre-call too, because there are new points as well. Really like the part of humanizing food, right? And you mentioned again Mother Earth, as we mentioned before, and also being at the heart of our livelihoods, right? Our day-to-day where we work. I will also love maybe for the following question on the second part, who are the ones who need to be resilient? Does everyone need to be resilient, or is there a specific group? And if companies need to be resilient too, and maybe work that way hand in hand with local communities. I don't know, it's just a thought. Thank you so much, Sandrine. We'll go on with Lucy. Thank you very much. So, Lucy, before I ask your question, is there a specific story about the background that you have today?
The background about myself or about the community?
Yes. No, your virtual background.
Having been born in the community in the dry lands of Kenya, and you should know that Kenya is about 80% semi-arid, and coming from a pastoral communities, I was born in quite a dry area, and then coming from the Maasai, we had to move from here to there, and especially at my age where we were young, and that time pastoralism was really something that families were moving from different places to get pasture. And then I grew up in a place where it was really productive. It was a place where it was not really a highland, but an area inhabited by a cosmopolitan kind of community within the same region where I come from. And there was lots of food. There was also quite vegetation was there. It was really beautiful. It was like paradise. But as years came by, we saw this dwindling out, degradation, logging, and the wildlife that was there also disappeared. And it was really a concern because I grew in a very traditional setting whereby even at a young age, I could accompany the mothers to collect medicinal plants, to collect different, seedlings and so on. Little did I know that in future I would come and talk about it. I always get amazed, and when I go back to the village, I try to wonder, how did it come and has it reached where I am at the moment? But one of the most important things, I think, throughout my life, I had that faith. I had that holistic view of the life and the community, and appreciated very much the environment which we were in. And all my life, people keep asking me, why do you still stay in Kenya? Why didn't you go abroad or something? I have traveled throughout the world, but you can never tell me to stay away from there. I want to stay where the communities are and the way they really struggle, not really struggle. Well, you can say struggle, but it's the way of life. And looking at that, the resilience that you're talking about is something holistic. It's something that they, despite the fact that that is their life, the way they are, they don't even recognize the words we use and talk about resilience and so on. But I think it's very important to know that everything is connected. When you look at the life, when you look at the food and the way they value the earth and everything that is life within that particular land and earth, you find that it's very, very important because it's connected. From the word go, we were told the kind of food people eat and why is that food important at that particular time, and why you should eat what you are given and make sure you finish it and not leave it. And if you have to have it stay overnight, you'll have to eat it in the morning because it's something that is holistic and given by God. It's living with nature. Living in harmony with nature is the whole word. And one thing I also learned is that the women started working together. They have always worked together. They have always shared, coming from a pastoral community, which was also living with other agro-agricultural women. There are also some fisher folks. And if you meet all of them in the market, they are sharing. They are kind of discussing and giving each other seeds and so on. So from the word go, we know that this was something that was very important, not until globalization, of course, came in and they started disrupting the life of the people. And of course, what they grow and what they eat and what we thought was holistic also became something else, more of a commodity than just something that is supposed to be respected. So I think that's where I began, and that is the way life is. And I am so glad that even up to now, I still push on the women to make sure that at least they look at a holistic way of having their food in the garden, making sure there is a small kitchen garden, making sure that you have fresh vegetables, that you are more using organic than using other chemicals, carrying the wisdom that we get because we are from traditional communities, and those traditional communities have every single step of their life is calculated in a way that it focuses on the way God made us to make sure that we respect our nature and that we can move and live in a holy way of life. And that's why even when we had the COVID issue, you found that most indigenous peoples were more resilient. They were more able to really act as fast as possible and start thinking of healthy food, medicinal plants, and making their life a bit more holistic and looking at it in a different perspective and asking the gods, whoever they believe in, and how we live in and how they can be able to move in a positive way. So I think I'll stop there, then I can continue if I don't want to go so much out of discussion. Thank you.
I love it, Lucy, how you transitioned your response. Look at Ravneet, he's clapping. You're from the background, the story into the question too. I would also love to know further on, what does holistic mean? What does it imply? How can we be more holistic as well? I would love to know more of that later on. Thank you so much, Lucy. Now we'll go with Carolina. Thank you so much, Carolina, for being here. Well, let us know in your perspective and in your view, where does resilience rely and how does it reflect back or forward into empowering local communities?
Thank you so much, Vivi, and all of the speakers for this opportunity. I was thinking about the word resilience, and I think it lies within ourselves, but it then translates into the resilience of the community. So hearing what Sandrine was saying about this beautiful concept of the humanization of food and thinking about the relationship it has with environment, because I come from a background of defense of environment issues and in the environment itself. I think about this resilience and this humanization of food when we must accept as humans that the food system relies essentially on a healthy environment. So when we are harming the environment in any way, we are also harming ourselves. Because if we cannot feed ourselves properly, if we cannot develop our communities and raise our children in a healthy environment, how can we really take care of each other? So that relationship is so interconnected that we must accept it with humility and with the realization that every action that our humanity and our enterprises and the agriculture in this aspect, agriculture and cattle ranchers and all of the work that we do with our lands have an effect on the environment, and then eventually has an effect on our food systems. So I love the idea of the concept of Pachamama for us in our religious cosmovision of the indigenous people here in Bolivia. It's the concept of Mother Earth, which means that we come from her and then we will go back to her. That is the true nature of our lives. And maybe somehow along the way, we have disconnected ourselves from that nature or circle of nature, and we think that we are apart from it. So when we're talking about environmental rights, we're saying that crimes against our mother nature are actually crimes against ourselves, against humanity itself. And I love that, for example, in the Guarani culture here, and it's an indigenous group in Bolivia, in the Orient side, when women were given birth, they would go near a river where they would give birth. And the first contact of the child would be, of course, coming from their mother, but touching the earth. So both mothers would be in the birth of this new life, this new soul, Mother Earth and then the mother. So the idea and the cosmovision of always being connected to our Mother Earth, who gives us life, and the mother, our human mother, has been in our cosmovision, but somehow it's been misplaced, or we're not really following through with this vision. And going back to the resilience issue and the community, we had an amazing experience here. We're facing mega fires in an alarming level in Bolivia. There's a place where there's the Chiquitano forest, which is the last best conserved Chiquitano forest, which is the wet and dry forest in the world. And cattle ranchers are expanding their frontiers and are growing food there, especially soy. So there's a lot of issues, and fires are going out of hand year and year. So communities during the fires started developing this system of community kitchens, we call them. They would get together and they'll start cooking together to help the firefighters to help fight the fires. And after a few years of that, the pandemic came, and they were left with this community, this sense of community, and to work together. And when the pandemic hit, they actually rebuilt an old hospital in the middle of nowhere. It's a community with maybe 2,500 people, and they didn't have access to health, and they knew that if COVID hit, they would be very, vulnerable. So they rebuilt a hospital that was abandoned in the 70s. They started organizing, and neighborhoods would take over the rebuilding of an aisle, and we started helping them with donations. So this resilience and this sense of community, working together while they were cooking together, while they were taking care of each other, and then facing a pandemic, because they knew that they are most vulnerable in the rural areas. So that experience has been so inspiring and beautiful to see that they actually built themselves a new hospital because nobody else was building that for them. And because of previous experiences during natural crisis, they had already developed this system of communicating between the communities and maybe knowing each other and trusting each other. So there's a whole holistic, experience in these tragedies that become resilience responses from the communities. And I wanted to share that experience about the rebuilding a hospital.
That's brilliant, Carolina, and also that I asked Lucy to explain us what holistic means. You kind of as well gave us the answer of that. It's admirable how they actually built them themselves and all of that. And another aspect that we've touched on other dialogues is all right. So there needs some sort of funding, and you mentioned donations to help them out. I'd love for you to also let us know how, does empowering require, how much funding does that need, and who is willing to support, and also it's a big topic too, who is willing to support in economic perspectives in projects in order to empower local communities. So thank you so much. I am loving this conversation. We'll go now with Nate. Thank you so much for joining. And I'd also love to know how, in either your perspective or in the whereabouts you are, how does resilience, how is resilience being reflected? Where does it rely? What do you take in from tradition with a more forward perspective into empowering local communities? Thank you, Nate.
Yeah, thank you, Bibi. Thank you for having me here. And it's fantastic to hear each of your perspectives. And I'm excited to build off of the conversations and insights that you all have had. I love what was recently said, that a resilient and healthy food system requires a resilient and holistic relationship to the natural world and to the environment. And certainly as a Jewish person and someone rooted in that particular faith community, our tradition is one of the main places where we find resiliency. Our tradition is inseparable from nature. Carolina, you said, when you harm the soil, you harm yourself. That's really very essential to our teachings, to our tradition. Right in the beginning of our first book of Torah, we're told that humanity was actually formed from the very soil itself. And so when we harm the soil, we are harming ourselves. And not only that, but there wasn't a Hebrew word for God for many, many centuries within our tradition, not because we didn't have an understanding of nature, but because we didn't have an understanding of nature separate from a divine reality. That nature actually was nothing more, nothing less than the manifestation of divinity. So not only are we harming ourselves when we harm nature, but we're also harming the divine, also profaning the divine. Our prayers are based on the seasons and the rainfall. We tell our time based on the sun and the moon and the stars. Our holidays are oriented toward harvest seasons and what is fresh and local in any given moment. We have a sabbatical that we are commanded to take every 7 years to let the earth lie fallow and to release ourselves and our society from the inequitable structures that inevitably build up over 6 years. And so we certainly find resilience in our tradition and reconnecting to that tradition. We also find resilience in our history, because for 3,000-4,000 years, Jews have had to be resilient by necessity, from the Exodus from Egypt to our temple being destroyed, to shocks to the system, as it were, and every stop along the way, from pogroms to genocide to being kicked out of places. We have had to figure out how to be resilient. And I take a lot of wisdom and learning from a colleague and teacher, Rabbi B'nai Lappi, who outlines what she calls her crash theory, that when a crash or a shock happens, that we have 3 primary responses that we can choose from. One is running away completely and creating a brand new narrative and something that's totally unrecognizable. Another is to deny that the crash happened and keep going on living our lives as if nothing changed. And the one that's most healthy and most productive, and I would say is the model of resilience, is to actually create a new reality that it remains rooted and tethered to tradition and to our core narratives, but is adapting to the current realities. And so that's a lot of the work that we do with Hazon, and that I try to do as a rabbi and a faith leader in the world of environmental justice, sustainability, and climate, using our spiritual technologies of prayer, of blessings, of song, our mourning practices, and the way that we approach grief, our scripture, our sacred time and holidays, and reimagine those and reinvent those based on current needs and realities. So as I mentioned before, our tradition was based in a hyper-local reality. Our tradition grew out of relationship with the land and the fruits and vegetables and trees and plants that existed around us. And now we are scattered all across the world. So how might we build out ritual that is still reflective of wherever we happen to be? We have a dinner and and a celebration of trees that asks us to eat fruits and nuts. And typically, traditionally, over the last couple hundred years at least, or since Jews have been in North America, I think there's an eating of food that may not actually be local to us. What would it mean to actually have this Seder, this gathering, this dinner, using foods that we can pick off the trees around us, that we can harvest right from around where we are? What would it look like to reimagine sacred eating? We have an entire structure and framework called kashrut, which is what is fit to eat and how do we engage in a relationship to food that is sacred. But how could something be sacred? How could something be kosher if the person who's picking it is working in slave-like conditions? How can we bless a vegetable or a fruit that was picked in that way? How can we consider something fit to eat if it was coming from a factory farm, right? What might be new standards and approaches and frameworks for sacred eating, for sacred food practices? When our people were standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, ready to receive divine revelation of what we call Torah, there was a covenant put forth, a brit in Hebrew, and the people responded, "Na'aseh v'nishma." We will act, and then we will understand. I think there is so much to try to grapple with, so much intellectual components of how to solve these problems on such a large scale, which is all crucial. But I take inspiration from my people who said, we will engage in this in an active way. And as we do so, we will understand the implications and impacts and continue to revise and adapt accordingly. The last thing I'll say is that our tradition at its core believes that, as has already been said, we are all one, we are all connected in a kind of divine reality of oneness. And so the best resiliency is when we recognize that and when we are working together to ensure that that each of us is supported in the ways that we need, and each of us is contributing to one another's liberation, humans and the more than human world.
Nate, that is brilliant. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Nate, I for you to know, I write everything so that I get a much better sense of the connections that we're making today. And I really love the part that you mentioned of acting and understanding. I think it's crucial that we all understand our relationship with each other, with the food that we put in our bodies, and how we're all intertwined eventually with the decisions that we take and that we act as well. Very, very clear about yes, modern day slavery that happens within the food chain. And as you mentioned, I believe we don't all need to be super religious in order to bless something, to have our blessing to come into our system, right? It needs to go in a very whole way. Well, thank you so much. Nate will go now with Sha'Von. Thank you so much for joining us. And I also would love to extend this same question. Where does resilience rely? And how does this reflect back or forward into empowering local communities?
Yes, thank you for that question, Bibi. I am so excited to be here with you all in this virtual space. Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are. I send greetings to you. So I want to start off with answering the question by framing the problem. Like, why are we having to be resilient in the first place? Like, why is resiliency a thing? So the National Black Food Injustice Alliance defines the problem as food apartheid, which is the systemic destruction of Black self-determination to control our food, whether by exclusion from agriculture industries, lack of access to arable lands and healthy food, predatory marketing, capitalism, or other blatant racist discriminatory acts in the food system. This inequity is marked by extreme segregation or concentrated health and low rates of land ownership. To combat that, I would say that resiliency lies on the people. The people are organizing to create just, equitable, community-centered food systems. And before I get into that, I also want to lift up scripture for the Black Church Food Security Network. Our work is rooted in Christian principles. So 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10 says, as each of you has received a gift, use it to serve one another. And that speaks to the heart and the approach of how we are building these community-based food systems. We are using the principles of asset-based community development to do so, acknowledging the fact that everyone has a gift, everyone has a role, and everyone has a place within building these just food systems. And also looking at the resources, the anchors, and the assets that are found in community. Not the large institutions, the big businesses, but those little small community traditions that could be leveraged to build these just food systems. And our work is rooted within the Black church because we have acknowledged and identified that churches have formalized the principles of mutual aid within the Black community. Historically, the Black church has always been a resource of hub, has always been a hub of resource and support, from the founding of banks to colleges, historically Black colleges and universities, to mutual aid societies. Also, 90% of giving is channeled through the Black church. And as Lucy mentioned in her presentation about ancestral wisdom, you can also find that in the Black church as well. So we are leveraging everything that's found within the culture of the Black church to do what needs to be done by building this just food system. So I would say it's a mix between going back to the history, learning from our past, and applying that to our future and the future that we are building collectively. So I would define that as a Sankofa moment that we are participating in, and acknowledging the ancestors whose shoulders that we stand on, because food apartheid is not a new issue that was created in the 20th century, 21st century. Food apartheid discrimination has been embedded within our food system since its inception. So we are standing on the shoulders of giants like Fannie Lou Hamer, who created Freedom Farm Co-op in Sunflower County, Mississippi, who said, food is used as a political weapon, but if you have a pig and in your backyard, you have some vegetables in your garden, you can feed yourself and nobody can push you around. So we are doing that. We are empowering our communities through the work of the Black Church Food Security Network, and through the work of the Black churches to build our own community-based food systems by leveraging those resources that are readily available in our community. And we are doing that through our three main programs: Operation Higher Ground, where we are transforming vacant, unutilized land into community gardens. The Soil to Sanctuary Market is where we are transforming multi-purpose rooms, parking lots, open spaces into mini farmers markets, bringing in Black farmers, entrepreneurs, food makers, for them to sell their products directly to the community. And the Black Church Supported Agriculture Program is where we are buying bulk and selling the produce to churches who have food distribution programs and food ministries.
Wow, I am speechless. Sha'Von, that I got so many words from something that is embedded and to be resilient within the community, where you find those people and those individuals within. You mentioned not necessarily institutions, but then you have that, as you mentioned, the Black church with the support giving out. And we mentioned again the support. Who are the ones that we can rely on in order for communities to be resilient? If not, as you mentioned, the big institutions. and how could we eventually get their support and bring us back into that heart of it all, or as Carolina said, the Pachamama. I love that word, by the way. All right, thank you so much, Sha'Von. We'll go out now with Ravneet. All right, Ravneet, tell us, where does resilience rely, and how does it reflect back or forward into empowering local communities?
Great conversation so far, and I'll try to cover from past history and the way forward. And I'll talk about what resilience means to me from the Sikh faith or Sikh perspective. It's about embracing everyone. It's an inclusive model. It's about empowering everyone around you. It's about engaging everyone around you. 550 years ago, Guru Nanak, the first guru, the founder of Sikhism, witnessed that the food is such a thing that brings everyone together. So he initiated a food system, a community-based food system that we call langar. Some of you might have heard that gurdwaras or the Sikh temples everywhere in the world, they have free kitchens in them where everyone is welcomed to have free food, which is really healthy and sustainable food. Irrespective of their caste, color, creed, religion, whosoever you are, you're welcome to have and partake in the food and the langar ceremonies. You can even serve food. So Guru Nanak, 550 years ago, he established the langar system. Then he invested 20 rupees only to serve a couple of sadhus, like in an old forest. And that langar system was based on compassion. The three principles of Sikhism, that hard work or ethical work, meditation or prayers, and the third one, which is sharing. The most important, I feel, about the food system and about resilience and about sustainability is about sharing, is all around sharing. The second guru, Guru Angad Dev Ji, made his wife as in charge of the langar system, considering the woman empowerment. So that langar system was institutionalized. So the communities, which I feel, they're like cells in our bodies. The cells, they form molecules and then further organs and then an organism, like a huge society around us. But the langar system, which I feel creates a resilience around the communities because we share, we donate. Every Sikh it's compulsory for us to share our 10% to the vulnerable. So one thing that is clear, that to embrace and empower and engage the vulnerable who are deprived of healthy food, health, and so on. So that light there in the entire system. So whenever somebody has to come to a temple, the Gurdwara, he had to partake in the food ceremonies first and then come for the meditation session. That feeling that I am embraced, because that time in India, we had 4 different castes and about 3 to 4 religions. Nobody accepted anyone else. But Guru Nanak started embracing everyone. In all of his journeys, he connected to everyone in their own language, in their own traditions and culture, and taught the same 3 principles of meditating, ethical work, and sharing. That is what I see as a holistic approach from Guru Nanak's, his glasses, even if he didn't wear any. But yes, that can create a great model. Gurdwaras around the world, I assume there are like about 50,000 Gurdwaras, but I'll quote a couple of examples, like the Golden Temple in Amritsar. On an average day, they serve about 300,000 people with food, like 3 meals, like 1 lakh each. So just imagine a system where no one is deprived of a food because of such a community which is based on 3 strong pillars, a Gurdwara and a community around it is all empowered, is resilient. So no matter COVID hit India badly, but if you read the news, how the Sikh community and the Gurdwaras and the communities around them, they served people, sacrificed their own lives to give them, an honorable final ceremonies. They didn't just serve the food, medicine, they provided them shelter, hospitals, and the last cremation, dignity as well. So this kind of model is holistic because it comes from the community, faith-based, very strengthened model. And I'll continue about the future. As in EcoSikh, we are trying to go beyond human-centric because we are creating Guru Nanak sacred forests from last 2.5 years. So these forests, I call them temples for everyone, not for just for human beings, but the birds, the pollinators, butterflies, bumblebees, everyone, they are given shelter, social security in those forests, and food in those forests. So we are covered. These sacred forests are going beyond human centrics. And talking about this model, in 2 years, we have created about 300 plus such sacred forests. And we were able to train the youngsters who are not really rich, but they really want to do some ethical or sustainable work. We trained them how to create microforest, urban forest, or man-made forest, what you can call. We empowered them with the knowledge, training, we employed them, and now they are doing a sustainable business. As a part of EcoSikh, they are establishing sacred forests for everyone, be it Guru Nanak sacred forest, or Buddha sacred forest, or Muhammad sacred forest, Lord Krishna sacred forest. We are inviting everyone because of oneness in the world, the nature, common mother, the common world, as we consider in Sikhism, like the entire creation is one. This is the biggest resilience I see. Then if you cover the aspect of nature or environment, it can deal with every other kind of social, economic, and every kind of aspect. It can cover everything. That's it.
Thank you, Ravneet. And I love that you mentioned the pollinators, the birds, the animals, because it's not only human beings who live in the earth. And we all need to share this space, as you mentioned, that sense of commonality, of having a common ground, and sharing. And I think this term has been, left aside as well, because we are here sharing starting from food, and there has been a lot of inequality around the world. So we'll go on now with the dialogue phase. Thank you, Ravneet. And I see your questions and comments in the chat. We will be answering them in around 10 minutes. So please do ask your questions in the chat. Have a specific comment as well that you'd like to flag. And right now, I'd love to go with Lucy, since we've been speaking with local communities. And Lucy, I know that you do a lot of focus with public policy. So how do we translate between this? So how do you influence policy in a transparent and dignified ways, and ways to better implement it for there to be a holistic bridge between the communities and these policies, recognizing, of course, the Indigenous women and farmers, and who are they accountable to?
Great, thank you. I think the discussion has been so good and really has brought many aspects. And I like the aspects that have been brought, like what Rabbi talked about. When you have food, you have to have whoever is serving the food or cultivating it is somebody also who is accepted within that particular community. And that's exactly what you're talking about, the policies. The Guru Nanak, he spoke very clearly and looked at how the forest, and looking at the biodiversity, looking at the sacred part of it, and making sure that everything that has life has a home, which is very important. When we talk about policies, we know that there are so many policies that are made by different people. But indeed, when these policies are made, they have to be made and must be participatory. They must be inclusive. They must be with an open heart, just like the food you can make and serve on the table. It's something that already you have to show that you are welcoming that particular person. So to me, when you talk about that policy and how we influence the policy, is first of all, as we Indigenous women, Indigenous people where we are, we have to be transparent in our own way, we have to have that traditional way, which is also part of being holistic in what we do, in how we restore our environment, our farms, our lives within our community. And within that particular time, you are seeing that already you yourself, you know what you're doing. And that's how we create awareness with the community and build their capacity and enhance, actually not even building, but enhancing the knowledge that they have and giving them the confidence by giving them the rights to know that they have to speak out for what they have, to make sure that everybody can speak. That way you can be able to influence that policy, because when you insist that the communities have to know, I also have to be included in writing that policy, is very important. Look at the food. All countries in the world have quite different policies, but they are made somewhere there on a table, on a computer, written, and without involving these communities who are supposed to do that. And that's why the church, all the other religious institutions are insisting on playing a role. Because if we don't play a role in influencing that, policy becomes very difficult. We ourselves as Indigenous women, and also we work with different other groups within our own constituency of Indigenous women. I was very happy to hear the lady from Bolivia talking about Pachamama, which we have known for years, because every time we meet our Latin America colleagues and sisters and brothers, they always must talk about Pachamama. We know that that is Mother Earth. And I like the way she described all the traditions and cultures, because that's the same way. And internationally now, and also in our national levels, we have a process that we are able to really influence that those policies, because we want them to be influenced. Now, as we're preparing for the Food Summit, we are also preparing as Indigenous people to come up with some of the policies, some of the recommendations that we really need to have Indigenous people's rights respected and recognized. And that's why even for us at the community level, we want them to be heard, to be able to be recognized, that they have a role to play. And if at all they can feed their own families, their own community, by having fruits, having healthy food in the community, that is something that has to go to policy, and that is the policies that have to be recognized. So it's very important. And also you cannot work alone. You have to work with allies. And that's why we are here working together to make sure that we have those allies we can work together to influence these policies. You cannot do the influencing alone. You cannot change it alone. You have to change collectively together. And those are the collective rights that we have within our communities, the ones we call holistics, which are very well explained by everybody in different ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. So I hope that from the panel here today, we can all collaborate into something further and have a product or really transformation aspect for all of this here today. So I'll be taking in some of the questions from the audience, including in this one. And this, I'll start off with Sandrine. How would you describe food as a common good? And how do we really get access to food? Because we do mention we need access, but how do we get there? How do we make that happen? And on top of that, how does this all relate to faith, spirituality, to the future of regenerative, there you go, food systems, people, and planet? And a bit that goes also with Steve's questions of how do we create resilience in our food systems with faith and spiritual values.
Thank you, Bibi, and thank you to all of you for all of your beautiful inputs and insights. Really, the depth of this conversation has been quite phenomenal, and it's a shame that we can't have more conversations like this, because I think it really does anchor people back to what's most important. A couple of thoughts with regard to access to food. I mean, there needs to be actually a human rights declaration on the access to food. So one way to ensure that actually we have universal access is to ask for the Secretary General of the UN and countries to declare food access as a universal human right. And so that would be my first call. I then think that what we really need to do is push the business community, the food producers, to understand that actually food that is only produced for profit is no longer an option. And that is a conversation that we have to have with the private sector. And I would invite you all to join our stakeholder dialogue next week on value chains and on creating future and resilient value chains, because I think that the more people put pressure on businesses to make them and hold them accountable, as well as countries, for having access to food as a universal human right, the more we will actually get there. These conversations that we're having are absolutely fundamental, and they're beautiful at the community level. But I would urge you, and I'm going to maybe give you some of the ideas as well that we have in Action Track 5 that we've received from some of the faith-based groups and what we call ethical pathways towards food. But I would urge you to see even bigger. We really need to use the faith-based and work with faith-based communities and the large churches, temples, etc., to start to hold religion accountable as well, not only at the community level, but for the investment that they have, the money that is going into non-regenerative agricultural practices, that is going into fossil energy, that is actually destroying the planet and the soil. And as was so clearly said by Kaunina, you know, if you destroy the soil, you destroy yourself. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing that yesterday, a conversation with the head of the International Trade Union Confederation, Sharon Burrows, and I had. If you destroy the planet, there are no jobs. So why are we talking around the real problem here? But that means that we need to scale up solutions at all levels, that we need to decentralize at all levels, but also think about the central level. So coming back to your important point, Bibi, at the central level, we need to give the highest powers that be need to start calling for universal food access. Then we need to ensure that governments actually enable that to happen, because that is where the problem lies, in particular in conflict zones and in the most vulnerable countries across the globe. And you know, this talk around we need to have affordable and healthy food, yes, it's important. But if you don't have a plate, if you don't even have food on your plate, don't talk to me about affordable or healthy. And I think we need to get back to what's essential. So that's the first point. The second point is, and I'm just reading because we've just got these second wave solutions that I want to read to you very quickly so that you understand where we can all start to fit in terms of the solutions. We have as options that we've been given actually by also Steve and the great work that he's doing, inclusive and ethical development pathways for resilient food systems. And we would love to work with all of you on this. And this will enable us to also bring in this access point, ensuring life cycle tailored food for all people, regardless of their income. Again, pushing the stress on access to food. Health in harmony, planetary health approach to human and ecosystem well-being. This is a particular community-based case in Madagascar, but we can use it in particular also to scale up in other communities. And then the universal food access point that I have indicated to you about really valuing food, not as a commodity, but as a public good. So all of this is integrated into local community perspectives and the need for universal access and how we can better work together. But my plea is we need to work at the community level, but we also need to start holding governments and the highest levels accountable for ensuring that people have access to food.
Thank you, Sandrine. And also, we have fresh new information here. Thank you for that. And taking that into consideration, I'd like to move on with Nate. How have faith organizations brought together a bit what Sandrine is mentioning, and also that post-COVID consciousness on health with planet and communities? What are the actions that multiple sectors need to take to root us back to that natural world and be connected?
Thank you. Yeah, and just to acknowledge and extend my part to the fact that COVID for so many people is not post at this point, that it's very much still in the midst of it, and honoring that. But I do think that COVID itself has really reminded us of a few important pieces, and maybe taught us a few lessons. I think number one of the things that I was struck by almost immediately was just a reminder of how interconnected we are on a very practical, physical level. A virus that started in one corner of the globe spread within weeks across all corners. We really are one system, one ecosystem functioning in relationship together. At the same time, while everyone was impacted, many communities were impacted worse than others and continue to be. And I think we have to remember that the way in which care and resources are distributed based on the systems that we have created are inequitable and actually violent to communities. And then I think the third thing that really stood out to me is that we actually do have enough in most cases. We actually do have the ability to solve so many of these problems. We saw governments and local organizations jump into solution-oriented actions that we wouldn't have thought possible only weeks before, dedicating and allocating money and funds and policies in ways that we thought we might not ever see in our lifetime, or we're told that there's not money for, or they're too expensive, or whatever the case might be. So I think our question is, given the fact that we have enough, do we have the political will? And I would offer, maybe even more fundamentally, do we have the spiritual will to actually include everyone, to actually distribute resources and care equitably? In Ravneet's framing, do we have the spiritual and political will to share on a real fundamental level? We talk often about systemic change, and to me, the most central and essential system is the system of the soul, the system of spirit. And so how do we transform the way that each of us interacts as humans in this world with other humans, with our local communities, and with the natural world as well? With Hazon on the ground in Detroit, we're trying to adopt that Naseh V'Nishma model of the action model, leading to further understanding. So we have a number of different things that we're trying out. One, on a national scale, actually, we have something called our Brit Hazon, our Covenant of Hazon, which is really individual commitments to living a more sustainable life, believing in this idea of fractals, and what we do on a small scale ripples out to larger scales. Locally, we started last year in the midst of COVID, kind of at the height, and have continued this year our Relief Garden initiative along the lines of what Sha'Von was talking about, where we deliver compost and seeds and gardening education for free to anyone who signs up. Last year, within a couple weeks of starting this, we were able to deliver kits of those contents to over 500 local community members, with the idea that folks would grow for themselves, and if and when they had what they needed, then they were encouraged and supported in donating that food to those who are more food insecure. This year, we've had over 1,000 kits delivered, and really with the foundational belief in, Sha'Von, what you were talking about in terms of food sovereignty, in terms of empowering individuals and organizations who have signed up to be able to have control over their own food systems, what they're growing, how they're treating the soil, what they're putting in their bodies, and really trying to support individuals and communities in having that. We also started something called our Sustainability Starter Kit, a subscription package that folks are signing up for, where they receive 6 different kits over the course of the year, which help them make it really, really easy to engage in sustainable practices. Some of those include food-based solutions, like transitioning to more of a plant-rich diet, in which we provided all sorts of recipes and food products and local initiatives and education around that. Others around eating and growing local, and more. On a congregational level, I think is next, moving from the individual to how do organizations engage in this work and leverage power. Again, Sha'Von, a lot of what you were talking about with churches, we do that with synagogues and Jewish day schools and summer camps and other organizations. A lot of that same work in encouraging and supporting those organizations and taking sustainable action steps to model for their members what that can look like and inspire them. And then finally, we look to a communal or kind of regional level. We're on the ground in Metro Detroit, in the suburbs and in the city itself, Detroit being the largest majority Black city in the country, also recognizing that we are on Native land and there is still an active and an incredible Native community here. how do we support our Metro Detroit Jews in uplifting and supporting those who are on the front lines, those who are most impacted, and those who are really leading the way in what sustainable food systems and resilient communities look like on the ground on a local level. Detroit has well over 1,600 urban farms and gardens. Most of the urban agricultural work and food justice work that's happening here is being led by those communities that I mentioned. How do we support the local Detroit food co-op, Detroit People's Food Co-op? How do we support local Black land solidarity funds where community is raising money to allow Black individuals who don't have access to resources in the same way due to histories of racism be able to purchase land and farm that land? How do we work with Detroit Food Policy Council in making policies that support all people with an eye towards those who have been historically marginalized? So how do we go from the individual spiritual soul level to the congregational or organizational level to then have that reach out to the region, the neighborhoods in which we find ourselves?
Thank you so much, Rabbi Nate. I would love to ask Ravneet to follow up on this. You mentioned a lot of the Sikh values, that commonality. How do you replicate that elsewhere, right? In all parts of the world. How do you go about that? And also, let me add into this question one of the questions here on the chat. Of applied moral philosophy into our work. So not necessarily just religion, but how do we mix that up with philosophy? She mentioned here Nobel laureate Elinor Ostrom of sustaining our shared resources as a reference point.
Give me a chance to start from an example. I can quote of a person who is an industrialist.
It's 21:35.
And he was given a chance to do one good act for the nature, as we consider that nature has all the solutions in it. So one chance, he established a forest of 85,000 trees in his own, his own township where he has his own industry. That one act, good act, converted him. And now the person who used to have a lot of carbon emission is net zero, permanently on net zero in his own industry. Now he is motivating many other non-profits, big corporates and industrialists to follow the path where he can do some environmental justice and create a community around him where the community is more climate resilient. It is food resilient, like no climate change can affect their sustainability for food. And the communities are now self-sustaining, as we used to have in our indigenous time. Like we have more urbanators now, but the indigenous communities, they are independent of the corporates. No government can fail them. No climate change can fail them because they're depending on the native things, the native traditions, the native culture, native trees, native food. Everything is resilient. So that thing, that gives me an essence to understand what we say, what we do. There is a big report for that lies on what we say and what we do. The industries who really want to go sustainable, 80,000 such reports are just, useless. They haven't done anything. They have just made commitments, but they did not deliver because I feel there was no faith. There were no faith behind those commitments. So the greed and the chance they are still deprived of. They haven't been able to do one good act that person I quoted was able to. He has made a very big shift. Together with that person, we established a sacred forest in the deserts of Jodhpur, where I saw and witnessed that kind of community, which is resilient today. People, they are creating mud houses there, which are climate resilient. They have their own forest food, their indigenous crops, and they're not depending on what is given to them to sow in their own lands. The farmers there, they have their own sovereignty. So this is what I see, the faith, and people of faith can make big changes in communities. As I quoted earlier, the communities are the building blocks of our society, if we have those. And the kind of policy that I shared, the Guru Nanak's policy of hard work, sharing, and meditating. Meditation brings a feeling that we are all one. And that gives us a chance to share because we are one family. We are not different people. We embrace each other. We empower each other. And then we just make such a sustainable society that can live in harmony with nature, give a respectable space to nature, and coexist with the nature.
Definitely, we need to coexist. Please, audience and the rest of those who would be watching this on the internet, exactly, we need to coexist. And Carolina, I'll go with you. How do we coexist peacefully? How do you craft a peaceful strategy with long-time opposing groups? What are those alternatives reality that you see of making this happen? And how do you regain that connection, specifically starting with the younger generations?
Thank you, Vivi, for your question. I actually love the fact that you put that word peacefully in it, because as a nonviolent group, nonviolence movement, we aim to defend the environmental and human rights, but rooted in nonviolence. And peace is actually a synonym of nonviolence. And we learn a lot from leaders like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, who I so admire. And there's a phrase that he used to say, and was, people fail to get along because they fear each other, and they fear each other because they don't know each other, and they don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other. So something as simple as beginning to communicate, but actively communicate, can actually begin to solve our problems. So I believe that any sustainable solution must be built upon peace. And not only must be built upon peace, but it has to be rooted in peace, because peace is also a concept that involves justice and equality in every area. Not, in my case, for example, we wouldn't be talking just about environment, but it's also every sort of human rights you might be fighting for. And in peace is not only a theoretical, or should not be only a theoretical and technical approach, but also a spiritual approach. Because in this struggle, you must always be peaceful towards another. So in matters of solutions, I think that we must see each other as part of the solutions and not only as part of the problems. We must see other humans as part of the solutions. And for example, that have been dealing with these mega fires, there are 5th and 6th generation fires. It's really chaos and uncontrolled, an uncontrolled disaster. But if we want to aim for the causes, we have to sit together with big farmers and small farmers and public sector and private sector and everybody, and conservation and the conservationists and biologists. I mean, people that are expert on the field, and they're also in the civil society. So we must come together and we must create these essential safe spaces for us to talk, and not opposed to each other, but actually find those spaces and those issues that bind us together instead of finding more differences. And when I say something that binds us together, everybody wants a healthy family and aim for well-being, and I don't know, an economic relief, and to be sure in your finances. So we have to find those specific points where we can all agree upon, and then start building solutions upon those things that we have in common, instead of always see each other as the enemy and the opposite. And that's something that we really fight a lot to change the way that we see the system, and that we get involved in causes, because when we see an injustice, we tend to see a person or an enemy, and everything has to be blamed upon this enemy. And actually, because this holistic view of things actually show us that we have to be more humble and to see that everything is connected and we play a role sometimes in the problem, but many times we can play a role in the solution. So I love that idea of bringing the word peace into it, because it's also about sustainability. You know, if we want something to be sustainable, it has to be built on moral grounds and this spiritual new perspective of seeing things. And well, I don't know about fires, I could talk forever, but there's also another beautiful word that Martin Luther King used to use, which is agape. It's the highest form of love. And we should also, he used to bond the belief of a God, but also the belief that nonviolence was going to be the way that would lead, in that case, to fight and to solve and remedy America's race problems. But we can use it in any other problems that we see in society, because if our solutions are rooted in love, then they can be sustainable and they can also be inclusive. You know, we are environment. I cannot stress this enough when we're talking about environmental justice. We are talking about women's rights. We are talking about indigenous rights. We are talking about human rights and health rights. So everything is so interconnected that if we do not take in account the spiritual and moral aspects of it, it won't be sustainable. And so I love. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No worries. Sha'Von is here, and I'd love to follow up on something that you mentioned on the finance and the economics part of it, and ask Sha'Von this last question. Then we'll move to the call to action with Sandrine. Sha'Von, what you mentioned in previous discussions, cooperative economics. Can you please explain to us what that means, and how does this relate to food sovereignty, which is a word that sometimes, if we want to bring that peaceful connection that Carolina was saying, sometimes the word food sovereignty strikes a bit to some, and also how does this concept go back to Black farmers' empowerment and food apartheid to reduce inequalities?
Yes, thank you for that question. So I can actually start off with the Black farmer piece. So historically, in the US, Black farmers have always been disenfranchised. In the 1920s, Black farmers owned 26 million acres of land, and today is less than 3 million acres. So our work is situated in empowering and providing an avenue for Black farmers to stay in business and creating niche markets for them through the principles of cooperative economics. So cooperative economics is actually a principle through Nguzo Saba, which is one of the Kwanzaa principles. It means to build and maintain our own stores, shops, and other businesses and profit from them together. And that's what we are seeking to do in our partnership with Black farmers. And that looks like amplifying our collective buying power. And I mentioned in a previous response that I gave that 90% of giving is channeled through the Black church. 90% of Black giving is channeled through the Black church. So we are creating niche markets for farmers to come in and sell their produce directly to the community. And we're doing that through our Black church supported agriculture program. So we piloted last year because we saw two things in the midst of this pandemic. The first thing we saw was that Black farmers were not included in the USDA relief programs, and they were not included in the USDA food distribution programs. So we was like, we got to do something to support our farmers during this time. And we also saw that churches, the second thing we saw is that churches have pivoted to establishing food pantries and food distribution programs. And we saw a way to connect those two communities through our Black church supported agriculture program. So we started a program in September, and it ran from September to December. And last year, we generated over $30,000 in sales for Black farmers. One farmer we spent $5,000 with, and he said that that has been his largest single order to date, and he has been in business for 5 years. So we are creating or like I mentioned before, creating niche markets to support our businesses, to support our farmers through our community. And that looks like food sovereignty too. It's just like defining, redefining, and shaping what our food system looks like. When you know your farmer, you can have conversation with them about their growing practices. You can have conversation with them about what you like and what they can grow, because they know that they will have a market that they can sell consistently to.
Thank you, Sha'Von. And we'll wrap up with a call to action from Sandrine. Please tell us of what you've heard today and what you also your personal perspectives, work perspective, the comments from the audience. What should be our call to action on this specific action track, but also combining and sharing all of the other action tracks from here to the future.
Thank you, Bibi. And what I've heard today is some amazing work that you're all undertaking and your own calls to action in terms of regrounding ourselves in Mother Earth and ensuring that our faith carries us to do the right thing. What I call upon you to do is to ensure that your voices are loudly heard outside. And I can pledge, at least on my behalf and on behalf of the action track, that through the solutions that some of you have put forward, we want your voices to be heard. We want these solutions. Sha'Von, I love what you're doing. I think it's absolutely fundamental. Rabbi Nate as well, all of you, Ravneet, Lucy. I mean, it's incredible what you're doing in your own communities. What we need to get better at is connecting these stories to demonstrate that the narrative is changing, that people do have power, and that power can actually be sweet and wonderful and actually make people feel better. So that is the first call to action, is let's connect the dots between the stories that we've heard today, and let's amplify them and scale them and ensure that they're not lost in all the noise. The other key call to action is let's then move to scale. And that for me is really imperative. I've seen in the chat around the Laudato Si, I've seen absolutely the Catholic Church and the Pope is doing an incredible job. But as Steve clearly indicates also in the chat, and I would like to push back, we still have some of our greatest religions' wealth tied to stranded assets. That is not acceptable. This cannot just be about community change. It has to be about taking the money out of what is actually corrupting and creating the problem and putting it into the good. So I don't want this to be a Band-Aid approach. I don't want this to just be pockets of community effort. I want this to become the biggest campaign ever to ensure that people have access to what is essential, and that is food, to ensure that people feel good about their communities and feel like they're part of the community. So that would be my second call to action. Let's ensure that we build on these incredible stories, but let's put pressure where it hurts. Let's start to really shift the capital to where it needs to go. And my third call to action is please support us in our solutions. I really believe in what the team has done. I really believe that the resilience track is trying to come at this from a very different approach, which brings everything together under a holistic umbrella. And I believe that through systems optimization, we actually will have an impact. Otherwise, we will continue with siloed, disintegrated approaches that don't take into consideration the need for all the different actors and the need for all the different approaches to be combined for real impact in this decade of action. So that would be my call to action, Bibi.
I am clapping. Thank you so much to all the panelists.
There you go.
Oh, this has been brilliant. Thank you so much. And as you mentioned, that access to food to all. Not everyone is a producer, although as we saw, everyone should have a home garden. But yes, everyone is a consumer. We need food to live, and good food to eat healthy, to be healthy and live healthy as well. It has been an honor and immense pleasure to be moderating all the 5 dialogues of the Faith and Food. Thank you so much to the coalition. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Karena, to all the people within that coalition and the Center of Earth Ethics. I'll pass it on to Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you. And thank you again, Bibi, for being such a wonderful, remarkable moderator. I can't imagine doing these without you and the energy and perspective you bring. To each of the panelists, thank you so much. Your insights, your work, your wisdom, your spirit. Sometimes it's hard to have hope in this work. And then I sit in rooms like this and I'm reinvigorated because I'm reminded that it's not just me. It's happening around the globe, in communities, in institutions, in systems. And I think it is that full approach that's required of what are we doing in our own backyards and what are we doing to move these big systems, these big institutions to change. Sandrine, I just love the points you made for these calls to action. There is so much valuable work that we're doing in our own ways, but unless we really approach this full global system and change it and hit them where it hurts and move the money to where it needs to be to empower, so we don't have to ask that question, Sha'Von, of why are we talking about food resilience? Answering that question opens up so much opportunity and so much possibility. And so our group, the Faith and Food Coalition, see these dialogues as a beginning. These 5 dialogues were meant to articulate and help us understand where we need to go, and where we're going is what comes next. We're going to derive some faith principles out of these 5 dialogues. We'll be creating an interfaith statement. We will be presenting that at the Food Systems Summit. And then we will be going onwards because Sandrine, as you said in the beginning, this work doesn't end at the Food Systems Summit. The Food Systems Summit is a place where we launch from, where we work together, where we build these movements, where we work through our own localities and through our networks to create the change that we need to see. And so to all of you who have been a part of these from day one, get ready for an email from me in a few weeks because we want to talk with you as well. We want to build this power. We want to build this momentum and put it towards the action that we need to see at the local, at the regional, the national, and the international. So expect to see something from me. Expect to see more from this group. And we are just so excited to continue on to support Sandrine, everything that you're doing with Action Track 5, support everything that the other action tracks are doing, and finding ways to bond this network together so that each of us in our own ways and our own gifts can shape the world towards the direction it needs to go. So with that, I'm 5 minutes over time. To those of you who've lasted the entire way, thank you so much. We'll close it out here and we will be in touch. Thank you. Thank you. Have a wonderful day and so long.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.